Hi, welcome to Quirky Queen's Journals. My name's Kirsten. So I'm doing some more abstract art on the gel plate today, and I am trying to do it with lots of movement in it. So this is Windsor & Newton gold metallic ink. It's drawing ink, and I'm using a fan brush, and I'm just using it straight from the bottle and patting it onto the gel plate. The fan brush had left quite a solid mark there, and I wanted it to be more suggestive of the marks, so I just removed that bit there. Now this is white drawing ink from Windsor & Newton. The gold is still wet, but what I'm doing is I'm kind of putting the white down around it, but also slightly over it in places as well. Now I start off quite slow and precise, and then I just go, oh, and I just start sort of patting it out all over. Now I'm spattering it. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to be mindful that the first layer I put on the gel plate is actually going to be the top layer of the picture. I'm also trying to be quite gestural in my movements. So in my mind, to give the illusion of movement and to make it look quite dynamic, is I really need to be putting these paints down in different ways to create that. So these inks cost £3.85 each, which I thought was great. You can mix them with water, but I just used them straight from the jars because that was too much hassle. So I'm just rolling the paintbrush here. There's no water or anything, although I may make the paintbrush more wet at points. This is black calligraphy ink. Again, the gold and white are still wet. You can see how much it beads. See the way that I can actually move that bead of ink around? That was quite, I quite like that. So the areas where the sort of gold has dried a bit more, you can see that the black stays on a bit better. So I'm just doing some... This is a very thin paintbrush that I'm using, a very narrow head with only a few bristles on it. So that's limiting my movement, as in... I prefer a big paintbrush. I prefer to just kind of roll it all over the place. So by using this very small paintbrush, I'm limiting myself, which is, I suppose, helpful to me trying new things. So here I actually was thinking about, when you do sketching and you do some cross hatching. So that's kind of what I'm doing with the paintbrush here. Now, these are some quite quickly made lines, and I thought, So I decided to get back out the white ink and make some of the lines with that as well. So to me, they look kind of wispy, as if there may be a bit, like there's smoke or something coming. They have that kind of looseness to them. So this is Prism Violet acrylic paint, and I'm using a very watery paintbrush. This is filmed in real time. This is a full process video from start to finish, and I've not sped it up or slowed it down. This is exactly as it happened. So at the bottom of the gel plate, what I'm trying to do is that's kind of where the heavier paint is, where the heavier pressure's applied, where the slower movement is, and then just getting a bit more wispy and lighter as I move towards the top. So it gives the illusion of the bottom of the gel plate being, I suppose, more dense. That's where things are coming from. So I didn't start this video with a plan in mind or with any real kind of idea of what I was going to do. I just knew that I had these inks, and that when I'd made the last video, I loved the picture I made. It went down really well, but I never thought about the order of which it goes onto the paper. So this time I wanted to make sure that I was being more aware of how it's going to look on the page when I'm applying each layer. So this is Cadmium Lemon Yellow Acrylic Paint. That poor brush, I keep leaving it sitting in the paint pot, in the water, the dirty water. So it's not the nicest looking, but it's a great brush. Anyway, it's very wet and I'm using it to put the cadmium lemon yellow paint down, and the black calligraphy ink. Now, I don't know whether or not it hadn't dried properly or whether I'm reactivating it with the water. But whatever it was, I went with it. And so what I did was I tried to make it, so the colour, the black and the yellow were making together. I was trying to graduate that back into just the yellow. And it was also quite nice at giving a sort of separation between the bottom of the gel plate and the top of the gel plate without it being overly obvious. I'm using a toothbrush now because what I'm trying to do is put down some cadmium lemon yellow in a way that's not interfering with the sort of black green shade that's been made. Now, this is very thick and I had to leave this for 2 hours to dry, just to be aware of that. I could have made it thinner, I could have patted it off, but I chose not to. What I'm doing here is I just felt there was a bit too much up in the top, because for all I'm trying to cover the whole gel plate, I still want some areas to be busier than others. And that's the beauty of doing something like this on the gel plate instead of straight onto paper. You do have that bit of leeway to think to yourself, I'd rather take this in a slightly different direction. So I'm using this calligraphy paintbrush just now to try and be more precise about where I'm putting the paint, to add a little bit of structure. For example, kind of going up the middle from the bottom of the top, I've created a kind of curve, and I've created it more purposefully than I did the other parts of the yellow paint. Also, when you're applying these layers on top of what's underneath, you kind of have to be quite thoughtful about what you've already applied and how things like the pressure you're applying, the amount of water you're applying, if you're patting something off with paper, you have to be quite thoughtful about the effects these are going to have on the sort of mediums that you've used underneath. However, the other side of that is that something might happen that you don't expect. I think you've got more options than you do when you just put it onto paper. That's what I'm trying to say. So this is actually the side. This is the left side of the gel plate. I just rotated it so we could see the whole thing. I'm just adding in some more purple to bring it more together. The purple was very on the bottom. And also I like the idea of there being some purple and then the yellow and then some purple again. So some of the purple is coming up in front of the yellow and some's coming up behind. And that also helps to add a bit of movement, because you've got the same objects but they're in different places, if that makes sense. I hope it makes sense. It kind of makes sense to me. And like I say, I had to dry that for a long time before putting this purple down. The other thing is as well, obviously I'm quite often removing the paintbrush or whatever it is that I'm using from the gel plate, and I'm adding more paint or ink or water, or I'm drying it. And obviously I don't leave those bits in the video because that would be, it would be a bit difficult to watch. But just to be aware that I am doing things like that. I don't just put the paint on once and that's it. So So this here was a bit of an error, because what I've done is I've not actually put down the sort of feature point, I suppose. And then I've come in with this opaque paint. And no matter how thin I think I'm making this paint, it's not transparent and it does block off a lot of what's coming behind it. So I had to do a bit of a repair job. However, with it being unexpected and having to make a change, I think that actually added to the picture overall, because I had to chip away at this titanium buff to remove a lot of it so that other parts of the painting that were still to be made could show through. So the texture of it as well just now is not really like, it looks like I've used a colour shaper. So I'm just scrunching up a piece of paper and pouncing it very gently, because I don't want to remove the paint that's underneath. You know, the dry paint underneath, I don't want that to come off with the wet paint that's on top of it. And that could happen if you press too hard. In fact, I think I do that at one point. I think I get a tiny wee bit of the yellow come off. And where that yellow's quite thick as well, you know, I need to be extra careful. This is me just showing you that once you've got a build-up of paint on the paper, you want to kind of re-scrunch it. And I'm also, the edges of the titanium buff, I'm trying to make them a bit more graduated as well, so they're less harsh. See there? So now what I do first of all to try and remove some of the titanium buff is to use water. I'm splattering water on, and then I remembered, oh, that was daft, because it's going to eat away at the paint and the ink that's underneath as well. So I get my towel out and I try and remove it gently. This is a delicate operation at this moment. Do you see there the wet paint that's come off? I mean, we're definitely getting a distressed weathered look, that's for sure. So that's me showing you, see there, you can see how opaque the titanium buff is. I'm basically just trying to create more areas where further paint can show through, but without overly disturbing what's underneath the titanium buff. So this is raw sienna acrylic paint that I'm using, and I'm applying it with a wet sponge. But I know it sounds daft after what I just said about the titanium buff, but I want a fuller coverage than this. See, a lot of the paint that I'd applied earlier and where I still want to add to is where the titanium buff is covering, whereas the raw sienna, I'd be quite happy for it to be more opaque. So that was just more water going on to titanium buff. This towel's been well used. It all works out in the end, and this all adds to it. So I'm just going to use my fingers now to apply it, because at least then I can feel what's underneath and I can tell what sort of pressure's needed. And it's also another way to add different types of texture. I'm kind of pouncing. I think at this stage I'm just aware of how much I've disrupted what was underneath already with the titanium buff. So I'm also kind of graduating the edges of the titanium buff and the raw sienna as well. So these two colours did take a long time, however they are providing the background of the picture. I'm also trying to repair the fact that I blocked off any more paint that I add to the gel plate by choosing quite opaque colours. But then that did turn into a positive because I am using them to maybe put the paint across in a way that it wouldn't normally be put across. So kind of, I'm trying to use it to my advantage. Got out my scoring tool with the ball in the end again. I think whenever I get a wee bit stuck for decision making, I bring that out. I end up using a dry sponge on it to pat it down, just to add a different type of texture. And I think that worked quite well. It also made it a bit more solid looking and it allowed it to be different from the titanium buff, but still have that same, background look to it. So you've also got to, when the paint's wet, it'll behave in a way. When it's becoming drier, it behaves in a different way. So blending it in with the titanium buff is easier to do when it gets a bit drier. So I feel like I'm going back and forth a lot, but it's just, you just got to go with the paint as it's ready to be moved about. I need to be careful how hard I'm patting with this as well, because when I pat extra hard, I'm actually putting that square shape of the sponge into the paint, and I don't want that. I want it to look quite natural. So this has been dried, and now I'm adding in the kind of focal points. Now this is Windsor violet, which is much darker and more opaque than the Prism violet that I used earlier on. That is a skewer that I used to mix paint with, that I'm applying it with. So this skewer is not sharp at all, and it's got its own level of being distressed over time due to the amount of paint layers that it's dealt with. So you can see there, you can hardly see the purple through the back of that. Just shows you how strong that titanium buff is. You wouldn't really realise it when you see it here. So to me, these are kind of looking like, well, the first one looks like a kind of sort of wigwam or like a sort of fire pit. And then the next two, I think, look like ships in a stormy sea. I think it's the way the skewer moves. It gives the illusion of it being like sails. But at the moment, it's looking much better at this side of the gel plate than it is at the other. So at this stage, a lot of what I do now is very much, you don't see it too much in the video, but I am looking underneath the gel plate a lot. Now, I've just added in some extra couple of purple specks just to try and balance it. We don't want three solid purple shapes randomly on the picture. So I just added a couple of sweeps, at the top and at the side, just to help it be a bit more balanced. And also here I'm sort of chipping bits of the paint away so that I can have more purple showing through. But I'm checking it all the time just to see, because I don't want it to be, I still want it to look really quite dynamic and quite, natural, the way all the colours are together. I don't want it to be big solid colour blocks. I want it to look like it's all mixed in with the other paints, if you like. You'll see at the end. Do at least sometimes when you come across a problem, you actually think, I don't know how to deal with that. And at least here I was like, I can deal with this. It might not be as good or the same as what I originally wanted, but we can still work with it. Does look good at this side, doesn't it? So like I said earlier, this is a full process video. So as much as I'm tempted to sort of just show you how it's done and then move on to the next stage, I have kept in, you know, everything that I did do on the gel plate. I'm just seeing what else I do here. Extending that out a wee bit. See, it does, you've got contouring. The you know, the shapes are curving as if, you know, there is a wind or something. And earlier on, I had the yellow paint curving to the right. And so I've got two of the ships, we'll call them, also curving to the right. So I'm hoping that that sort of repetition of movement, even though the paint's been applied differently, but just repeating that same movement with my hands will bring it together, create unity, and also help create movement, because you don't want them all going in the same direction. That's not what I'm trying to say. But some of the stronger colours going in the same direction. In my mind, that makes sense, and it feels like that would bring unity, but also make it look like there is movement as well. If I'm wrong, please tell me. Please correct me. I just want knowledge. So what I'm doing now is, you know, when the paint's dry on the gel plate, you can kind of crack it if you move the gel plate too much. Well, I'm actually trying to purposefully make that happen, just to add some more texture, but also to try and let more of that purple paint show through. The purple paint is wet at this stage still. I'm not sure how much it really added, but it did add a bit of more texture to the purple areas. So now, because it's quite thick in some areas, I'm just taking off some of the excess very, very gently, because I don't want to pull off the paint I've just applied and the dry paint that's underneath. Putting these purple, the kind of strong purple, powerful kind of features of this painting on after the opaque paints actually worked really well, because I think it made them look more powerful in the final picture, because it's as if they're coming up through all the other colours. Instead of, if I hadn't applied the buff and the sienna before the purple, they would have featured a lot more. So you would have seen them coming up from the bottom of the painting, but you just see them kind of coming through the other colours, and I think that makes it look as if they're bursting out more powerfully. So this is alizarin crimson acrylic paint. Now I have put on a very thick layer because there's a lot of different levels on here due to the different thicknesses of the paint that's been applied in different areas. So I've put on a very thick layer to make sure that I don't want big bald spots. I've put a lot of effort in here, so I've put on an excess of paint, and I'm making sure all the little spots are covered. And then what I'll do is I'll roll off the excess. Like you can see there that the picture's starting to show through the red more strongly. But again, I'm still just moving quite gently. I feel this picture's been through enough. So you can see there that I've actually pulled off a little bit of the paint. So I add some on with my finger very gently. This picture's fragile. It's been through a lot. So I leave this on for about 20 minutes. It's a watercolour paper. It's 230 GSM. At first I was very disappointed with it. But see, when it dries in, the colours dried in so much more vibrant. The white is more white. The purple's more purple. And it just worked really well. And I love it. I think it's much better than the one I did yesterday, even though I was so disappointed with it to begin with. I've not put a filter or anything on it. I don't put filters on my pictures. That is exactly how it looks. So I hope you enjoyed that, and thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you soon. Take care. Bye.